Hello, everybody. Looks like we're getting very near the end of the semester. Today ends Module 7, or today's lecture is the last lecture for Module 7. Module 7 actually ends next week. But there's only 8 modules in the class, or 8 weeks in the class, so everything ends next week. So please get any past due assignments to me as soon as possible. That way everything's turned in, caught up. There is a final exam for the course, which will open on Sunday. Whoops, dropped my pen. So the final exam will open on Sunday, and you will have until the semester ends, which is the following Sunday. So unlike most weeks, everything's due on the following Tuesday. Our semester ends on October 16th, which is a Sunday. So all of the module 8 stuff and really anything has to be turned in by then. So there's absolutely no submissions accepted after that. I wake up early in the mornings, so our semester is going to end on October 16th, which is a Sunday. So at 11:59, all of the assignments will close and lock, and then I'll wake up first thing Monday morning and finish up any grading and submit grades. And I wake up early, so I'm usually done with that before 7 o'clock. So make sure you get everything turned in by the last minute. The final exam will open on this coming Sunday, so you'll have 7 days to work on that, through that. I was not able to find time to add questions, so the final exam pulls from the same question banks as the weekly quizzes, and there are not extra questions in there right now. So if you've done all the weekly quizzes, you have seen every question that will be on the final exam already. To hopefully make that sound a little bit easier. And just like on the quizzes, I'll go back afterwards and double check for typos or capitalization issues or answers that I would count as correct, but the computer, it's not a perfect match to the answer key. There's usually a lot of those. I have a couple of quizzes to look over still and put points back on, and then I'll do that with the final exam. But that will open Monday, so that's that will open Sunday at midnight, and then you have till the following Sunday at 11:59 p.m. to take it. So exactly 7 days, exactly a calendar week. And that's the big thing from next week, the final exam and turn in your research paper. So might be a good idea to get that exam knocked out early, because you probably have stuff to do in your other courses as well, and get the stuff for this class knocked out really quick, because I was not able to find, like I said, I was not able to find time to add extra questions to the question banks. So it's pulling from the same one as the weekly quizzes, and there are no extra questions in there right now. So if you took the weekly quizzes, you have seen every question already that will be on the final. It's just, they'll all be there at once.
What's the time limit for final exam?
I'm sorry, what was that?
What is the time limit for final exam?
I think a couple hours, 2 hours.
2 hours.
Yeah, it should be plenty of time.
Okay.
I just put a really long time thing on there. If I put a time limit at all, it should be plenty of time though.
Yeah, because mostly like on the quizzes it's like 30 minutes.
Yeah, and it's like a bunch of the quizzes, so it's a lot longer than the quizzes.
Okay.
Several hours. I can't remember how many questions I put on there. I think it's worth 50 points. I can't remember if it's 50 questions or 25 questions at 2 points each. But there should be plenty of time to do it. If not, because I understand that sometimes things happen, let me know. Oh, excuse me. hopefully by now you've noticed that I'm a fairly laid back person. I understand how life gets overwhelming at times. So for today, got kind of a short list of things to talk about. Actually, only 3 things on the list, and we just checked off the first one on the list, which was mentioned the final exam. Opens on Sunday, and if you get that knocked out quickly, then that means you have more time to work on your other classes. So probably a good idea to knock that out quickly if possible. There's another thing I wanted to talk about with following up on a discussion board we did 2 weeks ago, I think, maybe 3 weeks ago. But it was just a discussion on graphical representations of data. Nobody wants to read big tables of numbers and random words. It's kind of a mess to dig through. So usually we put things in graphs and charts, and there were some great responses, great posts and replies throughout the discussion board, and examples of different types of graphs and when to use them and things like that. But there's another little aspect to it that I guess is just sharing the knowledge. It's do with it as you will. I'm just making sure you know it's available, but that's visual representation of data. It's a lot easier to read, is the point we talked about, but there's another aspect to that. I've heard some statistics that listed as over 90% of our processing is visual. Humans are a very visual species. We trust our eyes more than anything. Other statistics that say our visual sensory input is processed much faster in our brain, like tens of thousands of times faster than some of our other senses. We are a very visual species. And as such, visual cues have a lot of influence on people. Question in the chat room about the source for that stat. I think one of the web pages I'm going to look at will have some of them on there. I'll help you find a source for that if it will look good for your paper. Okay, yeah, the answer to our chat room, somebody already pointed towards NPR. That actually sounds like a really interesting podcast from NPR. But we can influence people with things. A big field of psychology is what's known as color theory. Y'all may have heard about that at some point before. It shows up big time in marketing. Like, one of the more famous ones that you may have heard about is on fast food chains. And if you haven't heard about it, you may have noticed that fast foods and other restaurants, it's very common to see red and yellow in their logos, much more so than other colors, right? Even if you never really looked into it, you may have noticed that lots and lots of restaurants use red and yellow on their logo. And that's because those colors have an influence on people. At times it almost makes people hungrier. When you are hungry, the colors red and yellow look more appealing. So like at lunchtime, when people leave the office and go get food, they see the red and yellow sign, and that's going to look more appealing than a different restaurant that maybe has a blue sign. Visual cues have that sort of influence on people. But there's a way that can be spun around and worked into the representation of data. So if you knew you were presenting some data at a meeting that was going to be held right before lunch, which means most of the people in that room would be hungry, if you chose reds and yellows for your visual representations of data, the people in that room are going to take that data better. They'll accept it quicker because it's a color that's more appealing when they look at that. And there's lots of little things in there like that. Color is the big one, but the fonts we use, sharp, jagged fonts or serif fonts versus non-serif fonts. Serifs are those little flags that decorate the end of letters. Using those fonts, curly fonts or monotype things or jagged edges, all of that does influence people. And working it into your visual representations of data can help you encourage people to accept your data quicker. So if you, I guess, make bad data look better, or good data that goes against the thing you're trying to, the point you're trying to make it look worse. Some of y'all might know that trick from the English language, right? English language is so complicated. When we write up paragraphs and essays and stuff, we can use adjectives and adverbs with good connotations to make our point sound better, and adjectives and adverbs that just sort of have a cultural negative aspect to them or negative connotation to them to make the counterpoint sound worse, depending on how we say it. Using words like big, gargantuan, huge, massive, large, all of those mean the same thing, but the one we say is going to, the adjective we choose is going to influence how that's used, right? Having a big impact sounds very, very different than having a gargantuan impact, although it means the exact same thing, and people are going to take the point very, very differently. And we can do that subtly in graphical representations that, to help influence people. I was just sharing the knowledge, definitely not encouraging you to go change people's minds with some bad data presented in a good way, but there are things we can look for. So a good place to start searching, if you search for things like do's and don'ts for visualizing data. Graphical artists often try to put things, they'll put together charts like this, or little blogs talking about the different things, and they'll have side-by-side comparisons showing what to do and what not to do. And on these sort of comparisons, the do is to minimize the influence the presentation has. So if you're looking to actually do the other thing, right? The first thing to bring into everybody's mind is probably unethical reasons for doing that, right? The company wants to do something bad and the data barely supports it, or it's a stretch to support it from the data. So you present it good, but it can go the other way. I was trying to think of an example, and maybe I couldn't come up with a good example, but maybe some company wants to kick an orphanage out of their current building, and they don't really have a good place to go. The orphans and foster care children will end up in a worse spot. The only place that orphanage can move to is a worse side of town, and you're the one presenting that has to present the data, and you'd lose your job if you didn't do what your employers wanted you to do, but you could kind of present their data, even if it's really good data, in a bad way to help from kicking those orphans out of their home. And in which case, would that really be an unethical situation? Helping people that need it? Yeah, a big deal in politics, mentioned in the chat room. Anybody that might have some political goals would be a very important thing to know. And whenever there's sort of a standard in blogs like this where the do side is what minimizes that influence, but what is labeled as the don't side is what will cause that influence. So I'm just presenting the knowledge, do with it what you will, but if that's the side you're going for, you want to look at that don't side presentation. Yeah, in politics, they will just straight up change the information. They will just present bad data. Every place except politics, we would get in serious trouble if we just presented bad, if we just manipulated the data directly like they do. Colors have an influence on people. So choosing colors that will appeal to people, like I mentioned, if you know the meeting is going to happen right before lunch, that means people are going to be hungry when you're doing the presentation to them. So if your graphs have lots of reds and yellows, they're going to take to it better, for the same reason that fast food logos are always made with reds and yellows. It's just more appealing to hungry people. For Americans in general, if you can use colors that will remind them of Easter or Halloween, they will take your data better. People have tried to, there's not really a good explanation as to why, but for Americans, most large parts of Europe, we're Americans, so that's the ones where we would be presenting data. Colors that would remind them of Easter, so like the soft pastels, close to natural colors, but in a soft pastel shade, the light blues and greens and things we would see at Easter, or Halloween colors, where it's the thick orange and blacks. And if you use those colors in your graphs, Americans will automatically think the data is better. And visual cues, there's lots and lots of things wrote up like this, and the side-by-side comparisons of, and typically what is written on the do side minimizes that influence. But if you want to go the other way, you can put it up with the, in the don't side. Like if you just look at those two bar graphs, you can see from the labels, they're completely arbitrary things just from the example. The same data is being presented, but we would take that in a drastically different manner when we see it. So that's one place to start searches for that. Just do's and don'ts for data visualization and manipulating that a little. One of my favorite tricks in the search engine when looking for stuff is to intentionally misspell words to see what Google corrects it to. If I'm not sure what to search for, I'll spell it wrong on purpose, and then Google will throw up that "did you mean?" So I don't know, leave out the LA here, and we get that. Well, anymore it just automatically corrects it. It used to say, "Did you mean to search for this?" And that can be a very helpful thing in figuring out what to search for, what's going to get you the best results. Influence, use data visualizations to influence others. Something like that. Put the word influence in there. I can't remember what I searched earlier, but yeah, it got back to this. This is the article I was wanting to pull up here. So from Forbes, and I don't see the other one. Whatever I searched earlier, articles from Forbes and a lot of big, powerful business magazines that, yeah, they just directly talk about it. They just ignore the ethical side altogether and give examples and talk about how the manner in which we present the data can impact others. Make them take our data. If our data is not looking so good, make them take it better. Or if there's good data that doesn't support the thing we want to happen, make people take that in a worse way. Lots and lots of things out there. The word influence in there. Influence people with data visualizations. There's another big one I saw earlier. Oh yeah, from Bloomberg. They just straight ignored any ethical implications. Oh yeah, this is a PDF. I downloaded it. I didn't even have to go look for it. But they ignored all the any ethical implications, and just directly made a to-do list of how to manipulate other people's decisions using visual representations of data. So as IT people, there's a good chance you're going to be the one that grabs the data out of the database and puts the visual representation together. So that's knowledge you should know. I'm just sharing the knowledge here. Do with it what you will. Obviously, it immediately jumped to comments about politics in the chat room. So there is a negative side to that, but there can also be, that can also be used positively. Just we're humans, we think of the negative side first, especially in business situations where profit's going to spring to the forefront of our mind. But that stuff does exist. And search for things like do's and don'ts for data visualization, and you'll come up with those side-by-side comparisons. And basically the graphic artists, they wrote on there how to influence people. They just put it under a don't label is how they went about addressing the ethical things. Or from like Forbes and Bloomberg, they just ignored the ethical part and just did a how-to list. Stuff that, something that is possible, and it is liable to fall back on IT people. So I want to make sure and talk about it. Ties into that data visualization thing that's on our major course learning objectives. Oh, which is another thing I wanted to look at. I always like to point this out in classes, especially the introduction classes. I pointed out at the beginning, I like to come back near the end somewhere and point at a list that is on the syllabus, which y'all probably haven't looked at the syllabus since the beginning of the semester, right? In any of your classes. But in every class here at Ivy Tech, the instructor is required to put in the syllabus the course outline of record, the official course listing, like how many credit hours it is, all that information, what the catalog says about the course. But in particular, this list right here, major course learning objectives. Every single class that you take at Ivy Tech will have this list in the syllabus. And well, it's very like it sounds. This is the things you are supposed to learn from the class. So in all of your classes, excuse me, especially ones that are a prerequisite for another class, near the end of the semester, make sure you come back and look over this list and feel that you learned everything that's on that list. Because if it's a prerequisite for another course, when you get into that next course, the instructor is going to expect that you already know the things from the prerequisite learning objectives list. And near the end of the semester and all your courses, look at this list and make sure you got your money's worth from the course. This is the things you're supposed to learn. And if there's anything missing, things that you don't feel very comfortable about, those are the first questions you want to ask, and make sure those questions are addressed before the course wraps up. Nature of information, that's that flow we kept going back to, right? The ancient need of humanity to turn raw facts into information where we have a context and can use them, into knowledge where we actually use them, and then wisdom where we learn from our experience. And computers are just the current tool to do that. So that's sort of a general description of this whole course. We talked some about the history of computing. We talked about hardware. Productivity software is like office software. So that's those Word and spreadsheet and PowerPoint assignments we did earlier. Research, technical writing. Well, that's what your main project for the course is. So that's covered here. We talked about software. Virtualization is this week, so we're getting ready to talk more about virtualization here in just a moment. I think there's some reading about the internet itself this week, but we also, that kind of worked into the networking lecture earlier. And then some, the reading assignment this week talks about the internet specifically. Well, we just talked about that a few seconds ago. The storage, local machines, cloud, different sorts of things. Talked about databases, networks. And we should have, I believe we've talked about everything on here, but make sure you look over that list. And if you're not feeling very comfortable about something or have questions, those are the questions you want to ask, not just for this class, for all of your courses. That's sort of the that's the list where you check and make sure you got your money's worth out of a course, that you learned everything. And they are always written vague and sort of vague and convoluted. So that way there's wiggle room in how they're taught and covered and stuff. These don't get updated as much as like the actual lecture plans. So sometimes they're vague and convoluted, and the question might just be, what does this mean? This course learning objective doesn't make any sense, but make sure you look at that in all your courses and ask those questions first. It's that's what you're supposed to be learning in the course. And if you move on to another course where it's a prerequisite for it, it's mildly using our class as an example, but maybe the ITSP, IT support for 132 and 136. When you start your 136 class, they're definitely going to expect that you learned all of the major course learning objectives from the 132 class. So they'll have an expectation that you already know those things on day one of the class. So make sure you feel comfortable with all of those in every class you go through. Or since we're Americans, put it in money format. That's the list to make sure you feel like you got your money's worth out of the course. The checklist is like, yep, learn that, learn that, learn that, learn that. When everything's checked off, that's when you can say you got your money's worth out of the course. 127. Okay, so the main topic this week is virtualization. The simplest way to put it is it's a fake machine. Instead of the physical hardware running an operating system connected to it, we use software, a software version of the machine that thinks it's a separate machine altogether. Very, very powerful tools, very common. So like the GRE labs at school, we can log on to any of those with the same user account because it's not really they're not really independent machines. What they did is the lab tech put together one virtual machine, and when everything was working right on that, he just put that virtual machine on every single physical device in the lab. So they're all kind of the same thing. So that's a very common one that you will see if you're heading into IT. You probably want everybody in the company working on the same system, basically having the same thing going on, the same security protocols, the same software available, the same restrictions, and the same restrictions, same access on any machine in the company. So the best way to control that is to do it on a virtual machine, and then all of your users only access that virtual machine instead of the local physical device they're sitting beside. Also has some other advantages for repairs, fixing things. When things go wrong, it's a fake machine. It's disposable. We delete it and install a new one, that's what makes it an incredibly powerful learning tool. Because if you're on a machine that no matter what you do, you will not hurt that expensive when you went to the store and paid a bunch of money for, you can experiment freely as you're learning. You can make any changes to configuration files you want, go into any file, change things, see what happens. It's like, oops, if I delete that folder, it apparently destroys the entire operating system. Delete the virtual machine and install a new virtual machine. And remember not to delete that folder again. That sort of thing. It's important for the learning process to be able to experiment freely. And virtual machines give us a very, very powerful tool to do so. I guess I'll go in this note here. I wasn't quite sure where to work in this note. For Apple users, Mac users, with Apple, you have to upgrade for virtualization on a Mac, on any Apple device, you have to upgrade to a different user agreement. And Apple doesn't let you switch up to that other user agreement for free, but Apple users are probably used to paying for stuff, right? It's not super expensive. It's not like you're buying you're not buying a new MacBook. It's just, kind of like the little add-ons. It's like the cost of usually like the cost of an add-on, but for but Apple users do have to upgrade to the next level of Apple user agreement in order to use virtualization on the machine. But it's not a huge cost. But we've also seen remote access, and that could be a good alternative that you could get by with do that for a lot cheaper. Do virtualization on some remote access machine, and then just remotely access it from your Mac. Might be a cost-saving alternative, because as students, anytime we hear about extra money being spent, that's not something we want to hear about, right? So there's that, but it's a very powerful tool. It gets used a lot. Pretty much anytime we talk about the cloud, we're talking about virtualization. Instead of everybody going out and buying really expensive servers, finding a place to keep them, keeping them up to date and everything, we use software that is a virtual representation of that server, and it's kind of like a fake server that is a lot more disposable and really easy to set up and tear down, and there are a lot of advantages to it. And it's software that replicates a real machine, so everything else we've covered this semester still applies to it. So that's what your lab is this week. You'll install, set up a virtual machine. The lab walks through Ubuntu. That's one of the most popular distros of Linux, a very, very popular single computer operating system. Ubuntu is also very, very popular to use on servers. A lot of people like to use that on their own personal computer and their server. So then they have the same thing going on. But there's lots and lots of versions of Linux. So basically for the lab, I just want you to go through a version of, set up a Linux machine. So distros is the word we use for the different versions. Okay, yeah, so we can kind of see right here, is there something behind the Zoom call? Okay, so the list is 3 across, 1, 2, 3, and then 38 more rows. So there's a lot of versions of Linux that you can use to set up. Ubuntu is what the lab walks step by step through. Other ones will be very similar. And when you get to the questions at the end of the lab, they'll basically run the update, run updates, and then make some folders, put a file in there, change the desktop background. Those will be the same on any of the distros, right? It's a different operating system, and all it covers is basic usage. So basic usage is available on all of them, but the steps to install it will be slightly different, because what we would do is install different versions. There's a lot on there, but I'm pretty much going to limit it to just 2 for the lab here, or going to look at 2. So obviously there's the Ubuntu. The link is in the manual, but it might be better just to search for those things, right? Your instructions on homework assignments, not just for my class, all the way through your schooling for IT, they'll probably provide links and instructions like, okay, go to this link and download this thing. But make sure you can do it without already being given the link as well. Make sure you know how you're able to search Google or Bing or whatever search engine you prefer. What's that one with no ads? Duck something. Does anybody know which one I'm talking about? The logo looks like a duck. I can't remember the name, but there's no ads in it whatsoever. DuckDuckGo, yes, thank you. If you like that search engine, Avast antivirus also includes a search engine that's more secure than some of the other ones. Has extra security features. It always frustrates me to no end because it feels like it's blocking me from doing things. I'm like, no, I know how to fix a computer when it breaks. I don't need all those features blocking me from doing stuff. So for like Ubuntu, instead of following that link in the lab, you can search for download Ubuntu. You go right to it, see the site ubuntu.com. That sounds like a nice official site for it. Okay. Yeah, I've met quite a few people that really like DuckDuckGo. What is this? Oh, using cookies. That's fine. If you don't want to agree, sign the user agreement. This software is available other places as well. Linux is completely open source, so there's other places we could download it from. Those are probably all ubuntu.com. Releases, download Ubuntu from the repository. So we can check different repositories for it. That's somebody's private one. From Docker itself, in nodes, lots and lots of different places that it can be downloaded from. I'm just going to go to the official site. And LTS usually stands for long-term support. A lot of people when they're first getting started looking for software and finding things, choosing between different softwares, they'll think LT stands for light or something, but LTS usually stands for long-term support. I mean, they think they've got most of the bugs worked out, and there are developers standing ready to fix any bugs if somebody announces it. Which those are usually right at the top of the list. And if there's one above the LTS version, that's usually in beta test or something where there's probably still a lot of bugs, but they need people to use it so they can find all the bugs. At least at this point, you all probably don't want to be beta testers. So whatever version it is, just hit download. This is what that link goes to. Should start in a second. There you go. And what you want to look for is this, make sure you get a file that has the ISO extension. That's what all of your operating system file extensions will be. And they're really big files. Notice this one, 3.6 gigabytes. So during our Zoom call here, that's going to take 2 hours to download. So it's one of those things that start the download and then go get lunch or something, because it might take a while. Probably quicker than 2 hours when not on a Zoom call. And all of your operating systems will be like that. Download Windows 11. So if we go here, oh, they put it right here in the search results. They have that disk image, the ISO file. So if you wanted to, if you're a Mac user, most of your instructors are probably just going to test their weekly assignments on a Windows machine and then give you the Windows instructions. So it might not hurt to have a virtual Windows machine running on your Mac. The best way to do that is set up parallel. Since your assignment this week is for virtual machines, which you can do with a virtual machine, but Mac OS also has something called parallel. And if you search for parallel on a Mac, in the long run, parallels will do better than a simple virtual machine. That puts 2 full machines. Yeah, so the Windows installation assistant or installation media, I'm guessing this one has a wizard that you click through, and this one just kind of does it all at once. I have not looked at them, but that's my guess from the labels. But just select your version and download that. Okay, English. there it is, 64-bit download. And once you get the link, again, you'll see the operating system downloads as an ISO file, which is something you might want to learn how to do anyway, right? Even if you're not going to use virtual machines, if you're going to keep up on just regular machines where each physical hardware has its own operating system running on it, kind of like we've been talking about all semester, at some point you might want to upgrade operating systems and change that. So practicing on a virtual machine is a great place to practice that. I'm not sure where I was going with the first part of that sentence, but again, 5.2 gigabytes. So these are huge files and will take a while to download. Should be a Mac one here. Download Mac OS for VMware. So the two biggest versions of virtual machine software are VMware and VirtualBox. You have more control over the things during setup with VirtualBox. I guess another way to say that is more of the initial setup steps are automated in VMware. So I think that's an easier one to start with. You still have the same control. You just have to start your machine and then go in and change settings. But there's more to do in VirtualBox. And I think VMware is a little bit easier to use. That's why I went with that for the lab. Download Mac OS. So there's a blog here. You can read through the blog. Monterey is not the newest version, is it? Any Mac people know what the latest version is? I don't think it's Monterey, but yeah, you can find links like that. There should be one from the Apple Store directly. Catalina, that's what I was thinking was the latest. But maybe Catalina is a couple days old. Okay. I don't know why I'm seeing ads for anime. I don't watch anime. Oh, okay, Monterey is the latest. Oh yeah, so skip the ads. Oh yeah, Catalina is an old one. Did I just click that link? Oh, download. There we go. I'm canceling it anyway. Anything else there? But again, 8.3 gigabytes. So you can see it's a really, really, really big file. So for Linux ones, Ubuntu is what the lab instructions walk through. But some of y'all might like this other option a little bit better. Kali Linux, for those heading into cybersecurity, which is kind of about half the people in the IT program. Usually about half the people go for cybersecurity, about half go for software development, and a few people go into the other programs. A very small number of people go into the other ones. So it's almost a 50-50 split between those two, except for the 5 or 6 people that go into the other programs. But for those going into cybersecurity, Kali Linux is very, very popular amongst cybersecurity specialists. It comes with a lot of built-in tools for, well, it says right here, penetration testing and ethical hacking. Lots and lots of tools. So you have, like, from the default installation, the way maybe Windows 11 here comes with some some office type of software and solitaire games, and I guess the Walmart app, and a few things pre-installed that they think people would need. Kali Linux has software like you'd have 3 or 4 options on password cracking software, or Wireshark is almost always on there, and lots of software you would need to run penetration testing on other servers. Oh, that's another great use for virtual machines, is you can test your security. A great place to test your security without actually breaking your actual system. Duplicate your security on a virtual machine and then see if you can crack into that virtual machine. And if you can, then that means there's a problem with your security. So you can kind of keep it secret on your little virtual machine there, fix the problem, and then update that on the real system without it being quite so big of a deal. So Kali Linux, Kali.org is probably the one that cybersecurity people will want to do for this lab instead of Ubuntu. And I wanted to point at this. So there's some pre-built virtual machines or the installer image. For what we're doing in the lab, go ahead and go with the installer image. That's the ISO file. It's kind of down here. There's several different versions. Just choose which one would be appropriate for your system. 64 or 32-bit Intel systems, or the M1 or M2 chip, whichever system you have. And you'll notice that there's different versions, but all of them, all these tabs have at least one thing that specifically says installer. So you want the one that says installer, and when you download that, that'll get your ISO, which I think I already downloaded. Whoops. Okay, yeah, I can cancel this. Kali is a little bit smaller than the others, only 3 gigabytes, but it still takes a minute to download. And then once you have the operating system image, I installed this today. If anybody needs a good Python IDE, that's a really, really good integrated development environment for working in Python. But that's a sort of a different point. What is this? Not sure what that one was. So once you have the ISO, the image for your operating system, we need to install it on the virtual machine. This is a useful thing, so I thought I'd go through it in class real quick. And Kali is a little bit different than the Ubuntu ones, and I figure, well, cybersecurity and software development are almost a 50-50 split that covers the entire school of IT. So I'm figure about half of y'all would probably rather have Kali than Ubuntu, and the lab instructions walk through Ubuntu. So when you open VMware, so I have that in the downloads folder, which is probably where your operating system image will be as well. You'll just create a new virtual machine, and we want the second option, the installer disk image, and then just browse to wherever that is. So in downloads, here's the ISO file. Just choose that. And on Kali, it won't automatically detect it. For Ubuntu, Windows 11, Catalina, Monterey, a lot of your operating systems, it will tell what it is, but it won't recognize Kali by default. So we have to set that up. So on the next page, it is a Linux system, and there's a lot of versions of Linux, and Linux is fully customizable. That's the main reason computer experts seem to prefer Linux so much, is they have full control over the operating system. It's not learning to work with what Microsoft or Apple wanted us to do. We have complete control over that system to do whatever we want with it. So there's a lot of versions. Kali Linux, just like Ubuntu, was made with the Debian kernel. So you want to choose one of the Debians. The Debian 8 is the one I found works best. 9 and 10 should work, but there were a couple times I had weird crashes, but I also would be doing fairly advanced things on them. So you're probably good with 9 and 10, but as you progress further and further, it's often a good idea to back it off a version or so. That way you're not on the latest, newest version, and all of the bugs have already been found and fixed. Which the basic intro level, it's definitely covered there. But when you get up to really advanced features, there might still be some bugs hidden because nobody's tried to use that feature since the release. And so nobody's noticed that there's a bug there yet. So I had a couple of those. So I usually back off to Debian 8 is working fine. And then just whether you have a 64 or a 32-bit system. So make sure you choose Debian 8.x something, whether it's 64 or 32. And that'll work fine with the Kali, and give it a good name. So Kali Linux also, because I already have a Kali Linux machine. So give it a name so you can recognize it, because you can have lots of virtual machines. A good place for comparison, right? When you're updating your company's IT system, the IT all across the company, you want to be able to do side-by-side comparisons. So you can set up several virtual machines that are similar, just slight differences, and that gives you a good way to do side-by-side comparisons and set up the whole scientific method thing. Put together an experiment and a control group and see which version is going to work better. Choose how much data is on that, how much storage space you have, and all the settings can be changed later. Pretty much after that, choosing the Debian for Kali, you'll just choose defaults. The defaults will work. How much storage space, split it up in multiple files. That's just better for the computer. If you're going to like push it out onto, say, 50 company computers, put the same virtual machine on all of them. In that case, a single file can be better, because then you're sending just a single file to each different computer. But it's possible to do it both ways, and multiple files is better for the machine. That's why it's the default. The defaults are probably all good, and once you hit finish, it'll get it set up, and then you run it, and you'll do all the operating system setup stuff the first time. Little message here. So it's doing things, and I would recommend doing the graphical install. Then there's a nice little GUI. And notice that little bubble up there. It says return to your computer, press Control-Alt. So as far as the computer is concerned, this is a completely separate machine. We could network them together, but as far as the computer, our own operating system is concerned, this is a different machine just using its monitor. I don't know why that's beeping at me, but I'm going to choose graphical install, and then it'll walk through the steps. Basically, choose the defaults on everything. There's one place it'll ask you a question about partitioning the drive. I think it's the second or third time it asks about partitioning the drive. Yeah, just keep hitting continue. We're not going to get there right now, but like the second or third time it asks a question about partitioning the drive, the default will say no. But that is the only place you want to change from the defaults, because you want to say, yes, do make that partition. It'll say something that kind of sounds like a warning message. It'll say, it'll set up the partition and it'll erase the data that's on there. And it kind of sounds like it's warning to erase your your system, but remember it's a virtual machine. So it'll erase what's already on the virtual machine, not your actual machine. So make sure you read that question correctly. And the default it'll say, do you want to set up this partition? And it defaults to no. So you just want to change that to say yes, because otherwise you have to create a different partition for it to create. It cannot do it without partitioning your hard drive and separating the storage space. This takes a few minutes. I guess I'll just leave that running. That's kind of the only thing. Make sure for those who want to set up Kali Linux, and if you're heading down a cybersecurity pathway, you probably want Kali Linux instead of Ubuntu. Just choose Debian 8 as your operating system. And then when you get to that second or third question that involves partitioning, make sure you click, make sure you switch the default from no to yes. Otherwise, choosing the defaults will be good all the way through. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, so this is about the time we normally take a break, right? Usually take a few minutes around now, but I like to front load classes so that when we get near the end of the semester and you're really busy in all your classes, there's we have some wiggle room in our class to help get caught up, because right now your schedule should have a chunk of time blocked off from 1 to 3:50 that says it's marked off for learning IT. And as we're coming on the end of the semester, you probably have some work to do catching up for our class, or other work to do in your other classes. You have the research project due. The final exam for us doesn't open until Sunday, but it'll open on Sunday. You have exactly a week to do it, and everything closes and locks at 11:59 p.m. on October 16th. That's when the semester ends. So make sure everything's in before then. That leaves us almost 2 hours here of time that should be blocked off on your schedule to actively do some stuff. As always, I will be sitting here until 3:50, or I'm in a guitar playing chair, which isn't the most comfortable. It's designed to have proper form for holding a guitar, like classical style. Not the most comfortable thing to sit in, so I'll probably be sitting in the other room in a comfortable chair, but I will be sitting here ready, leave my video set up so that I can jump back on a Zoom call in a split second if you have any questions. And so I guess that was it for today. Let me know if you have any questions. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap up?
No.
Okay, please use our time productively. This should already be blocked off in your calendar to learn IT. So learn IT. I do teach more than this class. So if you have, I'm here waiting for questions. Send questions my way if you have them. Otherwise, everybody have a great weekend. The final exam opens on Sunday. We talked about that earlier, and I will see you on Tuesday.
Have a good day.